Did Jesus abolish the Torah? Dr. Matthias Henze of Rice University argues that he did not. How did he come to this conclusion? That's what we'll talk about here today on Bible History. Dr. Henze received his PhD at Harvard University, and currently he is the professor of Hebrew Bible and Early Judaism and the founding director of the program in Jewish Studies at Rice University. His areas of interest include Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, Jewish literature and thought at the time of the Second Temple, the history of biblical interpretation, apocalyptic literature, Syriac language and literature, and the Qumran fragments. Along with many academic accomplishments, he has also completed 7 marathons in 7 continents in 7 years, which includes Antarctica. In his book Mind the Gap, How the Writings Between the Old and New Testament Help Us Understand Jesus, Dr. Henze points out that Jews during the Second Temple period held the Torah, the Mosaic Law, in high esteem, and at the same time, they had different interpretations of how to observe these commandments. They had different understandings of the meaning of Torah. And Jesus, as a Second Temple Jew, was a participant in this dialogue, in this debate. And he says that if we're going to understand Jesus' position of whether he taught his followers to stop keeping the commandments, of whether he abolished the Torah, we need to go to a text where this is addressed, and specifically he points to the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew wrote his Gospel to primarily a Jewish audience that believed Jesus was the Messiah. And what Dr. Henze points out is that one of Matthew's objectives was to make this case that Jesus was the Messiah of Israel so that these fellow Jews would not leave their faith in Jesus as the Messiah. And in order to do that, he has to clarify Jesus' position on Torah observance. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 through 20, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law, until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments, and teaches others to do the same, will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Dr. Henze notes that from the beginning, Jesus makes it clear that he has no intention of contradicting the Torah or annulling the Torah, rather that he upholds the Torah and has come to fulfill it. This does not simply mean his complete obedience to the commandments, but that through his life and teachings he has come to perfect the Torah. Some scholars have argued that Jesus contradicted the Torah in the 6 statements where Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, but I say to you." They see Jesus as providing a new Torah in opposition to the one given by Moses. But Dr. Henze rightly points out that Jesus' statements in verses 17 through 20 was intended to be a preemptive way of countering such a misunderstanding. Dr. Henze also mentions the significance of Matthew's added detail of the location of Jesus' sermon. He says, "The setting on a mountain immediately recalls Moses, the first lawgiver, who went on Mount Sinai. Matthew describes Jesus as the new Moses. Moses gave Israel the Torah, and now Jesus is about to interpret it." In chapter 5, verse 20, Jesus goes on to explain to his disciples that their observance of the commandments, that their keeping of the Torah, should exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. What does this mean? How is this possible? Well, actually, Matthew addresses this point in chapter 23. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others." In this situation, Jesus is not rebuking these Pharisees for fulfilling the commandment to tithe. He's not saying their interpretation is wrong. Rather, he's saying they are neglecting the more important commandments, the weightier commandments. And specifically, he cites Micah 6, verse 8. "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" Dr. Henze explains, following specific laws takes second place behind intentionality and devotion. Observance alone will not do it. The weightier matter is the spirit in which one fulfills the commandments, and the recognition that the Torah is about more than individual commandments. The most famous time this issue comes up is when Jesus is asked directly by a Pharisee what the greatest commandment is. And this is found in Matthew chapter 22. One of the Pharisees, a lawyer, asked Jesus a question to test him. "Teacher, what commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Jesus' response comes from two passages found in the Torah. The first comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, which is part of the Jewish prayer called the Shema. And this is something that Jesus does to remind the lawyer of what he already knows. But the second passage Jesus cites is Leviticus 19, verse 18, to love your neighbor as yourself. And really, taken out of context, this verse could seem very random for Jesus to cite. So the question is, why did Jesus cite this of all the verses he could use? Dr. Henze points out that we can understand Jesus better when we examine what a rabbi who lived just a generation before Jesus had to say concerning this type of issue, and that is Rabbi Hillel. In the Talmud, there's a story where a Gentile wants to convert to Judaism and learn the entire Torah. So he comes to Rabbi Hillel, and Rabbi Hillel responds with the following: "What is hateful to you, do not to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it." Both Jesus and Hillel cite Leviticus 19 verse 18 that love is the epitome of Torah. For Jesus, he puts the love of God and the love of one's neighbor together. And both of these teachers uphold the Torah and understand that not all laws are equal, but that love is the most basic and essential commandment found in the Torah. This misconception that Jesus abolished the Torah, that the Jews thought they should keep these commandments, they centered their lives around keeping this Torah, but that Jesus freed his followers from this burden. To me, it seems that this kind of thinking has theological roots in supersessionism. What I'm not saying is that everyone who has this viewpoint is a supersessionist. Rather, I'm saying that this kind of historical thinking, this kind of reasoning, has theological roots in supersessionism. Dr. Henze explains, supersessionism, or replacement theology, is the Christian belief that the church superseded Israel. It imagines a denigrated form of Judaism that is depicted in such negative terms that it borders on the absurd. In the supersessionist view, Judaism typically is reduced to a deteriorated form of religion, an unfortunate distortion of what was once the pure religion of the biblical prophets. Its followers are obsessed with fulfilling the letter of the law in the hopes of some divine reward. It goes without saying that this form of legalistic Judaism is a caricature at best that bears no resemblance to anything we know about Judaism of the first century or of any other century for that matter. It is equally clear that this way of thinking about Judaism, which is hardly unique to supersessionists, is a source of many forms of modern anti-Judaism. Today, most Christian mainline denominations have renounced supersessionism, though residues of this kind of thinking are still widespread. So again, did Jesus abolish the Torah? I find Dr. Henze's argument persuasive, but I really want to know what you think, so please let us know in the comments whether you agree, whether you disagree. Feel free to subscribe and join us again next time on Bible History.